What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Bets and Banter. And today on the show, we're talking about UFC Vegas 86. We're coming off a great event last week at UFC Vegas 85, another middleweight main event. We're back in the Apex Center, and we got the same guest that you know and love, Rich, back in the building. How are you, my man?
What's up, Liam? Yeah, ready to break down this card, man. Killing it this year. 14 units last week. Marley McCann got it done for us. I know you had a bet too. Not the best card, but things have opened up this week. So I got some bets nonetheless, man.
Yeah, and what I like about this week's card is that we have plenty of fights to choose from. What I don't like is that a lot of these fights kind of stink, in my opinion. You know, not my favorite fight card on paper, but still plenty of props to dig into. Now we actually have some information to dig into on these fights as well. Earlier in the week, it was a little bit harder to make heads or tails of it, but now I'm starting to get a clearer picture. So excited to break this down with you, my man. If you guys are new here, welcome aboard. Just want to let you guys know we're going to start from the bottom of the card, work our way on up for bets and banter. And we're going to start, of course, with a 135-pound bout between Daniel Marcos and Aoriqileng. This is a spot where Daniel Marcos, undefeated fighter, he's taking a lot of steam in this spot, opens up, 15-0, and he's taking on Aoriqileng, who's had a somewhat middling UFC career. He's fought some tough guys, but he's kind of had up and down results at times, 25-11 overall as a professional, but training out of Fight Ready with a couple other guys, Mongolian, Chinese fighters. Seems like he's improving fight over fight. What do you make of this matchup, and how do you feel about this first fight of the night?
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, this is my mush of the week. I'm buying the dip on Aori. I'm forgiving him for the KO loss to Sahabi. I think that was just like a one-time thing, got caught, whatever you want to call it. I don't like Marcos. I don't like his process. I've cashed on him before. I cashed on him when he fought that Brazilian and knocked him out, even had the KO there. And now I'm fading him, man. He ain't going to do the things that you need to do to beat Aori. He isn't going to make it dirty. He's not going to push it against the cage. He's going to stand at range, and they're going to spar. So this is a pick'em fight. I'm getting close to plus 200. It's a no-brainer. I've seen a lot of people putting Marcos in parlays. It's just laziness, in my opinion. So, yeah, as you can tell, I'm fully on the Aori side. Don't mind the decision prop for him. It's plus 400. I think that's a bit wide, man.
Yeah, and I don't think that Aori is like the world's most menacing finisher, so I agree with you that there could be some potential value on a decision prop. We're looking at a guy in Aori who also could be a little bit more conservative, right? You get knocked out in a fight, you can just come in a little bit more conservative in your next fight. I do think that Marcos has some skills and some upside. I understand why he's taking some money, but again, when we're talking about minus 250 or whatever, does seem quite aggressive to me. Talk about level of competition. I mean, Simon Oliveira, not a very high level guy, did seem like a layup in that spot. If I'm not mistaken, Rich, he was an underdog in that matchup as well back in the day. So it's like he didn't come in with all this hype and acclaim necessarily on the same level. And now people see he goes and gets what was, I think indisputably a somewhat controversial win against Davey Grant, where a lot of people felt, it wasn't his win to have. And then it's like, okay, he still gets the win, and now he's being steamed out to a bigger price in his next fight. Now, is this a step down in competition? I think that's the argument that most people are making. And I would just say, I love Davey Grant as much as the next guy. Davey Grant's like a 50-50 UFC fighter at best. He kind of just took steroids later on in his career. If we're just taking the cat out of the bag, my man's making pizzas and swinging leather and taking steroids. That's what he's doing. And I love it about him. He's a cool guy, but he's going 50-50 fights with Adrian Yanez, who can't buy a win in his next two. It's you just see when you start to peel back the layers of the Davey Grant run, he was getting owned by Rafael Assunção and then memed to finish late in the fight. It's hey, God bless him for it. The guy has heart. He's a warrior. But even in fights against Martin Day, he's getting dropped and stuff. Davey Grant will go 50-50 with anybody. So again, now you're talking about 70% against Aoriqileng, who could probably go 50-50 with a lot of guys, in the division. We did see him get knocked out last time. Amil Zahabi, though, has weird power, which I had mentioned before that fight. He might have started taking steroids, or who knows what happened to him. But all of a sudden he started hitting people with power. I think a lot of it came from him timing his shots really well. Amil Zahabi just knows when to throw. He counters well on the offbeat and takes people out of the fight. So I think Amil Zahabi maybe is a little bit of a revelation on the power department. But I think that this is a fight where I can't get to a minus 250, minus 300 favorite on a guy who's an underdog 2 fights ago against Simon Oliveira. So it's just like not a fight I feel extremely bullish on. I don't love Aoriqileng. I don't think I'm going to bet on him his next 5 fights or something, but would I get to the window with the dog here? I think it's a dog or pass situation for me.
Yeah, you're right, man. It's a combination of both. It's Marcos being undefeated. He beat the gatekeeper in David Grant, so he's on the up in people's opinion. And yeah, Aori got flattened by Zahabi, who isn't much of anything to shout home about. So it's a combination of both driving the line, but styles make fights, and people should have looked into it more, in my opinion. It's not going to be, he's not going to cover his price tag, Marcos. So yeah, it's a fade, man.
Yeah, unless he produces one of those knockouts. Shout out to Matt, says, Liam, didn't know you were on the Gambler's Perspective. Appreciate you checking that out, brother. I went 3-0 on the Gambler's Perspective. Make no mistake. So hopefully they'll have me back one day, but appreciate you nonetheless. Next up, we got Hyder Amil taking on Fernie Garcia. And this is an interesting spot where Hyder Amil, he's the Bay Area guy, scrap pack, stand up, right? He wants to come in here, make a statement, kind of a little bit old to get signed off the Contender Series, especially when you go out there and maybe don't put on the greatest fight of all time against Hermansson, but he went out there and showed heart. He showed that he wants to be in the UFC. And so I think that's what he was rewarded with. Now, you look at this matchup on paper, Fernie Garcia, it's an interesting one in some ways, Rich, because like Fernie obviously was on the brink of being cut, right? He's 0-3 in the UFC. Didn't seem like they were doing him any favors, right? Rinya Nakamura's last fight, that shows you not trying to do him any favors. They're trying to feed him to guys that they really want to build up. But in this case, it's like, you know, he's taking a fight up at 145 against Hyder, and Hyder could definitely crack him, you know, but is Hyder going to take him down consistently like a lot of his recent opponents have? That's where I just run into some questions. I'm like, I don't know that he's going to do that. I think he's going to try and pressure. I think he's probably going to land some big shots, but I just think like on the archetypes of recent matchups for Fernie, this is like more manageable. I feel like he's going to have some opportunities to box, which is what he would prefer to be doing as I see it. So that's the one thing that makes me a little bit sketched about this. You know, when we're talking about a UFC debut, when we're talking about a guy who does fit my system criteria as the younger fighter here by 2 years, right? It's not a substantial one, but 2 years younger, has way more MMA experience as a professional in the UFC as well, fought tougher guys overall. So for me, it does feel like probably a slight inclination towards dog or pass money line pricing. But I could also see Hyder taking over late in this fight. I believe I bet Hyder Amil round 2 and round 3 on the Contender Series, just thinking that's kind of the way he likes to take his fights on. It's just pushing them into deep waters where most people start to break. And I do think when you talk about Fernie never being finished and then taking this fight on short notice and then taking it up a weight class, those are things that could contribute to you breaking, mentally fatiguing over the course of 15 minutes. And Hyder, he's been preparing for this date. So for me, I have to lean with Hyder as like who I think is going to get the job done here, but I don't know that I could get to the price given he's a little bit limited. He's a little bit vulnerable, I think, on the feet as well. He'll get himself into some wild exchanges. So that's my overall thoughts on this fight. How do you feel, Rich?
Yeah, well, like I was chatting to you earlier, man, I've actually caught a few people's podcasts this week. I usually don't listen to them, so I've got to see a lot of takes on this fight. And the general consensus seems to be that Garcia's durable. It's going to go the full 3 rounds. And I'm the exact opposite of that, man. I've seen that the fight doesn't go the distance is plus 150. I think that's wild. So, yeah, I think there's going to be violence, man. The short notice, yeah, Garcia's been hard to finish in the past, but he's been surviving in fights just to get to the finish line. And in this one, I think he knows, you know, this is just a cash grab. If I get finished, so what? I took it on short notice. There's no shame in that. So I love Amil by ITD plus 300. I like fight doesn't go the distance plus 150 quite largely as well, man. Garcia, he's a boxer. That's it. Doesn't offensively wrestle. I think he's one of these Mexicans who was brought in, you know, with the rest of them. And, you know, they threw him some fights. Let's see what we got with this guy. And they found out what they've got with Garcia. I think he's going to get cut after this one. The only thing I think is a worry is Garcia by submission, which is 1,200, only because I know if you want to beat Amil, you have to grapple him and sub him. I've seen people take the back many times. I've seen people put in the body locks. That's the Achilles heel of Amil, man, is the grappling someone who's got decent jiu-jitsu, a purple belt or whatever. But yeah, in this fight, I think he's going to be fine. He's going to avoid the guillotines on takedown attempts. He is wild, Amil. He will pressure, you know, take down a few punches, take down again in your face. So it's going to make for a fast-paced fight, which bodes well for the unders. And yeah, I love that look for this fight, man. I think he gets the finish.
Yeah, I don't mind that look at all. I think that when I'm looking at how Fernie could win this, I think he probably would have to get it done, inside the distance, or he'd have to, find a way to manage the course of this fight with a lot of takedown defense, being patient, and also, just picking him apart from the outside. Because I do think that like Amil should just have some physical advantages, as the bigger guy. Sometimes when you see it, people just get horsed around. It doesn't matter, exactly how skilled you are, right? If the other guy's just way bigger, stronger, they can kind of neutralize some of those advantages. So that for me is going to be the interesting dynamic here. I almost want to see these two weigh in and stand off next to each other, get a better feel for the size here. Because I didn't think Fernie was particularly big, a weight class down. So for whatever that's worth. But yeah, man, to your point, everybody seems to think this fight's going the distance or whatever. And I don't necessarily see it the same way. I think these are two guys that are capable of making categorical huge mistakes. But I think Amil's going to also try and sell out for the finish. So with that being said, man, let's move along to the next fight where we've got 205-pound Anthony Smith. No, I'm kidding. That's Bogdan Guskov, Uzbekistan's Anthony Smith. And Rich, this guy let us down last time. I know I don't have to remind you. We thought that he was going to go out there and present a little bit of a better product. Now he's got a much more winnable fight, right? He was fighting into the deeper end of the division, and I think that showed. Also, we see it all the time, right? UFC debut, maybe you have some jitters, maybe you underperform expectations. But also, I had noted in my breakdown for that fight, like, my danger factor was I just don't know if I could trust this guy's chin. I feel like it's a little sketchy based on what I'd seen on tape, but I was like, I'm not getting it at -110 and having to hope it's like +160. So I'm betting on the upside here of Volkan being old and this guy having some power, which I thought was clear on tape. But now when I'm looking at it, it's like, okay, Zach Pauga back against the wall in this spot. I would say, Rich, like, I think he knows that. I listened to an interview he did. He's like, yeah, that like I'm on the last fight of my contract. Haven't felt like I've performed up to my abilities yet in the UFC. And he's like, I thought I beat Modestus. But he's like, I realized what I'm lacking is the aggression. He's like, I'm just not going out there and being aggressive enough and like taking it to people. He's like, so I'm not going to hide my game plan. He's like, I'm going to let you know. I'm going to take this guy down. I'm going to put him on his ass. I'm going to beat him up. I'm going to finish him. And I was like, okay, Zach. All right, Zach, you spitting. So I was like, so do I take the fight not to go the distance here and just hope that like his aggression either leads to a finish or gets him killed? It's like that sounds to me like something I would definitely consider here. You've got two light heavyweights, right? Former heavyweight in Pauga. I predicted he was going to get knocked out by Usman. Why? Usman's huge. It's just like he's a monster, and if he lands one big shot on you, it could change the complexion of the fight. Did I think he was like super technical or something? No, I was like, yeah, maybe Pauga's even better, but like it just seems like two guys that fairly equal skill, and one's massive and more athletic, probably going to hit him harder if he does connect. So he landed like one punch in that fight and it killed him, right? That doesn't tell me that this guy has like the most fraudulent chin of all time or something. So I just think that this is kind of an honest fight. Like lines coming in. I feel like now, Rich, everybody's where we were last time, which is like, it's got to be Guskov. It's got to be Guskov, like Guskov. And I'm just like, maybe, just maybe, Guskov sucks. Like, because like I thought there was a chance he sucks, but I'm like, Volkan sucks. It's light heavyweight. Everybody sucks. No disrespect. But it's like most of these guys aren't very talented in skills. It's about who can be more volatile, who can be more dangerous, who can be more dynamic. And I'm like hearing the things I want to from Pauga. And by the way, I'm just like, is Guskov like certain to defend takedowns here? I'm like, I don't think so. Like, is Guskov like certain to avoid getting hit cleanly in this fight? I don't think so, based on what I've seen last time. I'm just like, in either case, I think both these guys, huge vulnerabilities, like low ceilings long-term in the division based on what we've seen so far. So for me, just like, give me somebody making a categorical mistake early and pay me. That's what I would like. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, I'd say don't listen to Pauga. He can say what he wants, but I've heard it before. I've seen this position many times when people say, I'm going to do this and that. And they get in there and they do the Jamal Polgs, dance and just do fuck all. So I'm not buying it. And even if he did want to do it, good luck to him. I think it's the wrong.
Molly said sub one, though. Molly said sub one, though. So it gives and it takes. It gives and it takes.
That's true. Yeah, I think Guskov's being brought in as like a hitman for Dana in this one. I don't think the UFC like Pauga. He's shown him what he has, and it's a decision machine, man. The Jordan Wright fight was disgusting, holding him against the cage for 3 rounds. He can try and take Guskov down. I don't think he'll be able to. I don't think he's a good fighter, man. He used to play football, transitioned to MMA, and I think he's serviceable until he fights somebody half decent. Guskov in that fight against Volkan, yeah, he got fucked up, man. But he tagged Volkan a couple of times. He's got fast hands, and I think he probably gets a KO, man. I think it's going to be some flash shit like it was when Usman TKO'd Pauga. Yeah, the same sort of thing, man. He's a big fucker as well. He's 6'3", Guskov. The fight starts on the feet, so good luck to Pauga, man. It's not a fight I want to have anything to do with. Like you said, Guskov's really green. He's not very good at all. So I'm not fading shit with shit in this one. I'll play some bets elsewhere, man.
Yeah, and it's one thing, like I said, at plus 160, right? Like last time out, I know we're fading a better fighter, right? But plus 160, I always talk about when you have unknowns, it should push the line closer to 50-50 inherently. That's just like the nature of gambling. And now we know a little bit more, which is the chin that I was worried about is a concern. So now we're not getting the same plus money either, right? The unknowns are a little bit smaller and the plus money is gone. So do I think that like Pauga should be like a heavy favorite? No, but I just think this is probably closer to pick. So like, that's why I don't think there's huge value either side. And the thing that concerns me is like everybody on Tapology, everybody you run into, I feel like you go poke somebody on the street. They're like Bogdan Guskov this week, plus 115. Like, I'm just like, you know what? That's the kind of bet that I don't like to be on. So it does make me nervous. However, to your point, if I was to pick who does the UFC prefer to get the win here, I would think it's obviously like the 1 or 2 guys that they have from Uzbekistan. They don't have a lot of guys from that region of the world. Like to get them going, right? Like to promote them if they can. So the Apex cards tend to be replete with international fighters. Go take a look at all the flags that you see side to side. That's the way that these cards are built. So Zach Pauga is just another like anonymous American football player who was on the Ultimate Fighter. So he could have some success, but to your point, Rich, the only other thing I'll mention, sometimes with football players, the one problem we see, vulnerability to being knocked out. Just like so much head trauma over the course of a lifetime, a career. We talk about second careers in combat. If you were a jiu-jitsu guy, if you wrestled before, could do numbers on your knees and things like that. How about football where it could do numbers on your knees, your back, your shoulders, elbows, and then also your brain? So it's just that's the one thing to be a little concerned about. Flash knockouts, like you mentioned, something that we've seen Austin Lane, Greg Hardy, number of Brendan Schaub. Some of the most like comical knockouts in UFC history have been former football players at a very high level. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. Next up, guys, let's move to a banger of a fight, 170-pound matchup that I don't think you could find somebody without an opinion here, right, Rich? It's like Jeremiah Wells, Max Griffin, the people's main event of the week. But I think it's a fascinating fight. I think it's fantastic matchmaking. Because Max Griffin, on the one hand, like, where do you use him now? He's kind of a guy that, like, you put him against some of your prospects, he might make them look bad. He might give them a hard night out. He might embarrass them. Ramiz Brahimaj, I think they tried to do him, like a favor, like, hey, here's Max Griffin, go out there. And then he gets his ear destroyed and blown up, never seen again, right? So it's like, I do think that they kind of have, tried to figure out where do we use this guy. Now they're not putting him against this young up-and-coming killer. They're putting him against another age contemporary in Jeremiah Wells, right? 37, 38, 2 guys that are a little bit too old to title contend, let's say. But what could they do? They can have fun fights. They can go out there and put on action. They can go out there and swang and bang, put on a show for the fans. And that's kind of what you would expect from these 2 guys. But Jeremiah Wells can mix it up, right? We saw against Matthew Semmelsberger, things started to go sideways. So he was like, no. We're not doing any more of that swanging and banging, dude. I am going shoot, takedowns. I think that this is a tricky fight to call because on the one hand, man, Max Griffin's burned me so many times. Like I've gone to the well a number of times when it looked good and then he comes up just short. And like the one that burns me to my core, I was there in person, man, that Neil Magny fight. UFC Columbus. I've only been to one UFC event in my life. UFC Columbus. He's out there tooling Neil Magny. He was up dominant round 1. And then he's getting like pile drivered like he was the Undertaker in round 3. I was just like, Max, what is happening right now? So I do think his cardio is a bit of a concern. But is Jeremiah Wells like a cardio machine? No, he just has a style that's more suited to gas out, right? Like if I gas out, but I can take you down and just lay on top of you, good style, right? And I think that that's kind of what Jeremiah has baked into his game. You know, he does have insane physical strength. I think his cage wrestling is phenomenal. He comes from, you know, the Marquez MMA team. They worked with the Daniel Gracie system. The way that those guys get double legs against the cage is just fantastic because they're all really freaky strong. They all know how to set it up with the overhand. So like people get afraid, like, I have to put my hands up, and then they just level change into the hips. I was shown how they do it, and then I see it on tape, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so easy. But that's the system, right? And when I'm looking, I say to myself, I think Wells could win this fight and do it in dominant fashion if he lands with the power or if he submits him on the ground. But like, I just don't feel comfortable that Wells is a guy that you could trust at chalk. When you see Wells in a lot of these fights, he's been an underdog in fights that people don't expect him to be. You know, like I think he was like even money or pick 'em odds with Court McGee. And now Max Griffin, who's a lot more dangerous, who actually has like real power himself. People are discounting his ability to finish the fight. And I think that Wells is a good hammer. I just don't know how good he is as a nail. I think the Semmelsberger fight is a good example of that. Rich, how do you feel?
Yeah, well, Semmelsberger's happy to just stay on his back, man. He's a fish on the mat. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. Yeah, I like Griffin, man. I don't think that Wells is going to be able to hold him down. He might be able to double leg him and get him down, but Max ain't going to stay there and play jiu-jitsu off his back like Harris, or he ain't going to just stay off his back like Semmelsberger. He's going to have get-ups, man, and he's going to make Wells work. And I think Wells has the worst cardio out of the two. So yeah, if they're working at a high pace, man, I think he's the one to fall off, not Max. The only person to hold Max down was Colby Covington back in the day. And that finish was due to attrition. It was round 3. He doesn't get slept either, Max, if you look at his record. He's been wobbled a couple of times. Zaleski, I remember well. He was doing the chicken dance, but he's notoriously got a decent chin, man. And yeah, I don't believe in Wells. I don't like his process. Go back to the fucking Blood Diamond fight. What was that shit? You know, when the fight starts, he starts doing laps around the cage. He's a weird guy, man, Wells, and not somebody I ever really want to have money on unless he's fighting someone like Hannah Cyphers. But he's not. He's fighting Max Griffin. Cashed on him plenty of times. Mike Perry back in the day, plus 300. So yeah, I'm on Max this week. The lines come in massively. I think he's plus 130 now. He was plus 170 at some point. So if you got in early, good for you. But I still think there's value there as an underdog, and I like Max to get it done, man.
Yeah, a couple other notes here, because we mentioned this on a few other fights. This is a guy who's on the last fight of his contract, right? And that could bring out the best in people. It could also, you know, be a higher pressure situation. So I think that Max Griffin, you know, he's got a lot to fight for here, which is good from a motivation standpoint. He's also a guy who's like a UFC lifer, you know, been around for a really long time, right? Had a lot of fights. And I do think that, you know, those kind of guys, they start to get on a little bit of a better pay scale and things like that as well. So I think for him to earn that contract, for him to like get back on, it's not only got to be a grind out, ugly split decision. I think he might need something special here. I think he might need to go out there, find a win, find a finish. And what I did like is I listened to the interviews on this one as well, Rich. Jeremiah Wells, you know, after his last fight, he said the right things. But this week he sounds a little bit more calm within himself. He was like, you know, the next guy I fight, I feel bad for that guy. I'm going to kill that guy. Like all this stuff. The night of the fight, he was just like, hey, guys, I lost. Like whatever. He did a funny video. He's like, I'm with the team. You know, I like the team. You know, I got a great support system. The next guy I fight, I feel bad for that guy. But then when you look at what Max was saying, he was like, listen, I've been going out there and, you know, when you're a veteran, sometimes you get in your own head and you start saying to yourself, you know, I got to do this to win, or, you know, I don't want to do that. And he's like, now I'm being more primal. He's like, I'm going back to what I used to be, where I was just a dumb brute and I didn't know anything. I'm coming forward trying to kill you. And I'm just like, that sounds like a cage fighter to me, damn it. Like that's the kind of guys that I want to get behind, or people that are going out there to do violence, you know. It's fine to go out there and be tactical and smart and those kind of things. But especially if I'm looking to bet violence, I want to know that you're in a space where you're not going to accept anything less. And I think that that's the kind of attitude that he's bringing to this fight. So should be a fun scrap, should be a great scrap. And I don't think we're seeing the scorecards here. I think somebody's getting finished in the welterweight division. Next up, my man, we got Devin Brown Bear Clark taking on Marcin Prachnio. Rich, I thought that this was going to be a way easier fight to call. And then I started watching tape and I was like, oh, good Lord. I still think there's a clear side, but I just don't think that there is at the price. So how do you feel about this matchup? And overall, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have to get too deep on this one. Clark should win with the wrestling. Prachnio's shown himself to be a bit of a flake, man. That fight against, was it Prachnio who got the sub in round 3? That was a disgusting look. So, yeah, it's a bit of MMA maths, but if Prachnio can do that to him, Clark should roll with the takedowns and avoid the big punches. He doesn't have submissions to wrap Clark up. That's what Clark likes to do, put his head in guillotines and get himself subbed. So you should be safe there. But the numbers disgusting, man. I think if you're going to play Clark now, you need to look at round 2 and 3, or even KO. I think was plus 400. I think that's a bit wide here. It should be like 280. So yeah, Clark for me on this one.
Yeah, Rich, I'm gonna agree with you. I agree that the price sucks, right? Like it's a pretty juiced money line. I will say though, it was staring me in the face last week at minus 193. So I understand why the line is blown out. And the reason that I'm not bullish on like jumping on the steam is that I watched the tape back and like these are clearly light heavyweight fighters, right? Like when you look at light heavyweight, there is a distinguishing amount of no skill. And Devin spent 3.5 minutes. I'm not kidding about this. You guys can fact check me. If I'm wrong, it was 3 minutes. Like he spent so much time in a front headlock, like guillotine scenario with William Knight. That was giving me a disease. I was watching that and I was literally getting diseases on my couch. I was like, this is unbelievable. But when you watch, William is just strong, right? Like he's very physically strong. And I honestly think Devin might have made the value assessment like, hey, he's not punching me. He's not hitting me. Let me just burn his arms out here. And then as soon as he doesn't have anything left in his arms, I'll start fighting. Because if you watch in rounds 2 and 3, he bops him. Like he absolutely hands it to him and he drops him in round 2, takes him down, and then knocks him out badly in round 3. So I do think there was maybe some method to the madness there. But is it a concerning visual when, William Knight is trying to hip in on a guillotine for like 3 minutes against you? Yes, that's definitely not a great visual. But when I look at Marcin, I agree, man. He does not have grappling. I take pride in all the things that I try and do in this life. I take pride in calling people's first career submission. I did it with Molly last week, and I know everybody got it. So some people got there first, but everybody got it. I know, and I'm glad about that. But when you talk about the fight on paper, I just say to myself, like, I like to call somebody's first sub. And Vitor Prachnio against Marcin Prachnio, I was like, it's a layup. I was like, they're trying to get it for him. And so Prachnio, sub round 3 was the call in the article, sub round 3 or decision. Because Marcin is a guy that starts to break over the course of the fight. Against Sam Alvey, it wasn't about breaking. It was just his chin's not very good. He kind of fights like a bonehead. And Sam Alvey does have underrated power. If you look, like Sam Alvey does one thing well. He throws the left hook from the lead. It's kind of an awkward punch. Most people don't see it coming. He almost knocked out Daun Jung. He almost knocked out Ryan Spann. Like he just fights very weird and awkward. So when you fight somebody like that, you can get clipped on the chin. I think that Devin Clark has a lot of power in his hook when he extends, but he throws like maybe 15 of them a fight. Like he just does not like to fight very much, in my view. Like I feel like this guy, somebody was like, Devin, you must fight. And he's like, all right. Like he's like a guy that people just keep shoving out there. And so I don't think he's trying to hurt people, honestly. Like I don't think he's like it was incidental that he hurt William Knight. He was like, yes, I don't have to fight anymore. But I don't think he's like a guy with bad intentions, right? I do think he's a guy that has so much more wrestling and grappling process than Marcin Prachnio that if he's able to extend him, he's probably going to be able to submit him as well. So that's the thing that for me, Prachnio, guys, is literally on top, like looking over at his coach, like, what do you think I should do? And his coach is like, you should probably head and arm choke him. He's like, all right. And he just head and arm. It's like unbelievable. Like he's just completely in control of the fight. And Marcin's like waiting under there like, hey, man, find a way to get me out of there, would you? That's what I feel like is going to happen here. If Devin Clark's getting the takedowns he should be, he's going to get on top. But there was a couple times, and the thing that gave me pause, where he got to double legs that are clean as a whistle and then just didn't take the guy down. I'm like, unbelievable. Only a light heavyweight. But hey, Dixon, I'm just saying, I think Vitor Prachnio had 0. It's like when you're trying to project out these things, you got to say, hey, is it possible? And I just think that one guy is a quitter. I think one guy gets tired. I think one guy has no grappling. And I think the other guy's going to wrestle. So, like, could he TKO him? Absolutely. But it's going to be priced accordingly. People know that. They've seen that. We've seen the William Knight fight. And I do think that the submission's there. You know, Vitor Petrino looks around. Hey, is it there? Yes, it's there. Okay, I'll grab it. Like, literally, it's like a conversation, a dialogue. If you can do that with somebody on the bottom, it's like, okay, they're what I affectionately refer to as a fish on the mat. No disrespect.
Yeah.
Although the other thing I will mention, this is not the
Yeah.
same physical Adonis that Vitor Petrino is. Vitor is like a absolute physical freak. He would dominate Devin Clark, in my opinion, just because of that. He's a hoss. But it was the lesson you learned from the Turkalj fight. Turkalj actually knows how to grapple, and he got owned in the grappling by Petrino because Petrino's a freak in strength. So then I was like, okay, yeah, Petrino can do what he wants to these people in the grappling. And we saw that against Marcin, but I think Clark can replicate the same success because he actually has technique and he has some of the same physical attributes. But next up, we've got a 115-pound bout with none of the same physical attributes, right? We go from 205 all the way down to the other side of the scale with Loma Lookboonmee, former atomweight fighter, taking on Bruna, Brasil. And this is a fun matchup, Rich. I'll let you kick this one off. I think you might have stronger thoughts than I, but really fascinating fight on paper.
Yeah, I do like Loma. I do think she wins in this one. I'm not a fan of Brasil. I don't think she's much of a quote-unquote fighter. You know, when she gets tagged, you can tell she doesn't like it, man. She kind of shells up, and literally one punch can change the course of the fight for her, man. She gets discouraged real fast. I think she's going to try and point fight, skirt on the outside and be pretty, but in the small cage, I think Loma at some point will clinch her, trip her, get on top, and the fight will probably be over shortly after, especially if she gets on top. Yeah, there is a big size discrepancy between the two, like a 4-inch height and reach advantage, but I don't think it matters all that much in this fight. Of course, metrics do matter in fights like Garimbo versus, PE, but in this one, I don't think it's going to matter too much, to be honest. I think she's very fortunate, Brasil, to be in the UFC. You know, yeah, she got that head kick on Dana White Contender Series, but it was against a soccer mom, man. So, you know, you can't really gauge her skills based off that. I don't think she's doing that type of shit to Loma. I think Loma's way more technical. And yeah, I did eye up the KO for Loma. And I was thinking rounds 2 or 3, but like I said earlier, I was listening to everyone's podcast, and I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing because, you know, I kind of feel like it's a bit mush now because everyone was mentioning it. But yeah, based on the styles of the fights, I do think Loma gets her out of there just because I think Brazil's got quit in her, man. And I don't think she's UFC level. So Loma for me.
Yeah, and this is going to be a source of disagreement for us. Now, I love Loma, right? I'm a huge Loma guy long term, always have been, but I don't love the huge size disparity in this fight. You know, number one, like this kind of just reminds me in terms of the size dynamic of the Marnik Man fight. And I had mentioned in that fight, I actually picked Bruna Brasil at the time, which wasn't a shock, but I said that I thought there was value on the fight ends by sub. And I thought there was value on Bruna Brasil by sub at the time. And, you know, it didn't end up playing out that way, right? She ends up kicking her in the head and finishing her instead. But when you looked at the fight on paper, I just said to myself, man, really long limb length is going to create submission opportunities. You know, it's harder to deal with people like that. And then when I look at Loma, there's fat on her grappling. I'm saying like I'm not talking about physical, anything physical. I'm talking about like, her grappling isn't clean. You know, there was times against Elise Reed where she was making like foundational errors sometimes in her passing, in her positioning, in her management of the space. And against Elise Reed, you get away with that, right? Like it's no problem, right? But I just think that Bruna Brasil, because of some of her physical intangibles, could potentially capitalize on some of those mistakes. I do think she's willing to attempt submissions if she does get put on her back in this fight. I don't think she'll necessarily be swamped right away. Now, I do think that if Loma is able to do damage on the feet first, that's where Loma could just dominate her on the ground. But I think that Bruna is probably like among these two, I think she's probably spent nearly as much time on the mat. Honestly, I'd have to look into that a little bit deeper. But I think that when you look at Loma, her skill on the feet is there, right? She's very talented on the feet. I've always talked about, I think her striking's brilliant. Her takedowns on the feet are also brilliant. But I'm worried that the takedowns, it might put her in a bad spot in this fight, let's say. But then also I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this fight's on the feet, I'm worried that she's going to get kept at a far distance, which could just turn into a close split decision type affair. Because Loma oftentimes is using her takedowns to succeed. And then if it's at the end of that distance, like I think Bruna could compete, if not like it'd be like a minus 115 type affair. She might even be able to lead the dance because she's a little bit longer. So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about this fight. I feel like Bruna Brasil was like, like the public darling, and like, that's why I was thinking Shauna Bannon was going to get one over on her, right? They were in Europe, and that fight ends up playing out where I'm like, man, neither one of these women is special. Her nickname, ironically, being the special one. But shout out to Fireside. He says Loma recently promoted to purple belt, takes down grown men. I mean, God bless her, but when you look at Loma right now, I believe she's left her training environment. So, I thought the Hickman brothers were a good team for her to be at. I thought that was a good setup. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Long-term thinking. So I just want to see how she looks here physically coming into this fight. Anytime you make changes like that in your life, I think it could have an impact. And the other one last thing I'll mention, Loma is just a little bit of a head case. Like I love Loma again. Skill for skill, better many times. I've done well, but she's talked about like I've dealt with mental health. I've dealt with all these struggles. And then you're going to introduce all these changes in your life right before a fight. It does just to me sound like something that could cause problems. And that is something that at a huge chalk distinction, I got to think about everything. I want to check every box. And that's the one, concern I would have for her here. Changing a bunch of things coming into a fight with a big, strong, and I would think motivated opponent here, but should be an interesting one. And Loma, definitely the more skilled fighter, fought better competition, no doubt about it. Next up, my man, a fight that you did an awesome shorts about. So if you guys haven't checked out Rich's channel, he did a great short breakdown of this fight. Do you want to echo some of your sentiments here about Timothy Cuamba and Bolaji Oki? Short notice matchup here in the lightweight division.
Yeah, so I'll change my language so I don't get cancelled like Lou. I don't think Oki is very good. I think that Cuamba's going to win. I think the line is super generous. If I didn't already make Marcos mush of the week, I would have made it Oki in this position. I was going to bet Demir against Oki, being 37, having a year and a half off, coming back from ACL surgery. I like Cuamba. I cashed on him on Dana White Contender Series in that split decision, or the one where everyone thought it was a robbery. But I like him, man. I think the problem with Cuamba, if you want to beat him, is wrestle him and sub him, because obviously looking at his regional tape, that's his Achilles heel. But Oki isn't going to do that. I felt like Oki was fortunate in the Dana White Contender Series fight to get Salvador out of there. Salvador, he backed him up to the cage and, threw some combinations and he went down. Fair play to him. He is athletic. I'll give him that. He's young. He's probably got a chin on him as well. But Cuamba's young as well, man. He's training at the PI. He's in Vegas. He's with the Basharat brothers. He's with that guy who fucking trains everyone, Dewey, the black guy with the dreads.
Dewey Cooper.
Dewey Cooper, yeah. Dewey Cooper was high on him. I watched an Instagram thing where he was talking about Cuamba and his skill set and, being confident. And yeah, I guess one thing that's important to mention, because I keep hearing people talk about it. This fight's at 155. Cuamba's notoriously at 145, so he's moving up. But the metrics are the same for both of them, man. I think it's a case where Cuamba's cutting a lot of weight to get to 145. So, on any given day, he could fight at 155 quite comfortably. I don't think there's going to be a huge size disparity between the two. And even if there was, man, so what? I fought fucking bigger people in my life. It doesn't mean that they're gonna win. So I don't think the metrics are stupid in this fight. So I don't think that matters. I don't think that the fact that Cuamba's, having a turnaround on 6 days' notice. Obviously, he fought some fight the other day and won in round 2. I like that, man. I like the fact that he's just fought and he's going at weight. He doesn't have to cut weight again. Why not? He's in shape. The only thing he hasn't had, obviously, is a camp. But neither's Oki. Oki doesn't know fuck all about Cuamba. So it's an even playing field, man. And the fact that they made Cuamba plus 210 or whatever it was, the lines come down a bit now, is just stupid, man. And every podcast I listened to, they was all saying the same thing. The size is going to be too much. The turnaround's too much. Them factors don't matter, in my opinion. I don't give a shit. I think Cuamba's going to win. I think he's going to submit him. And simply because Oki, from what I see, is a double white belt, man. He's got zero jiu-jitsu. What he does in fights, if the striking isn't going well for him, he goes for takedowns and gets them due to his athleticism. Cuamba showed on the Dana White Contender Series against Vogel, who's a grappler, kept trying to take him down. He's got good takedown defense. And even if he does get taken down, I know I said he's got a grappling deficiency, Cuamba, but I think it's a step above Oki, who I literally think is a white belt, man. I check his Instagram out. He's taking pictures with fighters and being a fanboy. So yeah, I don't like anything about Oki's game, and I'd probably never bet him in a fight, man. I don't like anything about his process at all. So yeah, that was as nice as I could be about him, man.
Yeah, I thought that the UFC was trying to sign Salvador. People have commented. I think the guys from Chronic Combat maybe posted the picture of Dana, like the post-fight reaction. And you know me, man, I check that shit. Like I'm a psycho. I try and find out like what do they want. And Dana looked like in that fight, he was like, damn, like our guy just got knocked out. And then he's like, yep, we're gonna sign him. Like that was basically the reaction. He's like, damn. Yep, like I have to sign that guy now. So it's just like I don't think that he like hates Oki and wants him to fail or something, but I just think like they brought in Salvador. They like I think he had fought Giga or something, like just like had the right kickboxing or whatever credentials on paper, and then it didn't work out. So now Oki's gonna step up in this spot, right? Was gonna take on Damir Hadzovic. Me and you kind of disagreed about that fight at first, where I was just like, I mean, the story's out on Damir. Like, if you take him down, fight's over. He just doesn't know anything, I think it was DKC took him down like 70 times, just like over and over. But if you don't do that, like he'll give you an honest fight, And so when I think about that, I just think I'm like, man, in this Cuamba, he's probably going to go out there and try and push pace, right? I don't think he's like an easy mark in the same way, like, oh, take him down one time, the fight's over, whereas I think like Damir just doesn't know what to do when he's stuck on the ground. He's just like, get off me, like, come on, fight me like a man. Like, that's what he starts doing, like not like doing things correctly to process, get up. I'm thinking in this spot, like Cuamba is like a young MMA fighter on the rise. Like he's probably going to know MMA meta, scoot to the cage, get my ass back up. And to your point, I don't think Oki's like, going to win the Mundials or something next week. So it's like, all right, he's probably not going to just go out there and easily submit him. Probably Cuamba's worst area. So I think on the feet, it's going to be a fairly honest fight where Oki has the power edge. So like I think he's probably going to have the chance of landing the knockout a little bit more than Cuamba in the early go, right? Like I think when you look at just two guys, one guy's a little bit bigger. I think that that's probably how it shakes out. I think he's probably more explosive of a puncher too. But then when you just look at Cuamba, he kind of takes on fights 2, 3, can keep pushing a little bit. I think he might be able to do that in this spot. So, yeah, I feel like short notice and a lot of intangibles pushes me towards Dogger Pass. How do you feel, brother?
Yeah, he's got the power, Oki. Sure, he can hit hard, but he can't hit hard, man. I like the speed for Cuamba. I see, I sound like Conor McGregor, man. I see stiffness when I look at Oki. When he's throwing his strikes, the way that he wings his punches from the side, they're not like short and, bringing it back in for the jab and that, and keeping his chin down. I think he's very wild, man, a bit of a brawler, a bit of a brute. And Cuamba's more technical, in my opinion, and speed kills. I can literally see Oki going for some winging bomb and, Cuamba just throwing a jab out there and fucking dropping him, man. So, yeah, I'm not worried one bit, man. Cuamba's going to fuck him up. It's his birthday on Sunday. Get the 50 Gs and congratulations, man. You made it. You're in the UFC.
Hey, Natalia Silva didn't go out there and get that finish, but she gave herself the gift anyway, right? Went out there and got that easy money decision for her birthday. So see if the birthday folk can keep it rolling. But next up, we've got Officer Trevin Giles rounding out the preliminary portion of the evening, taking on Carlos Prates. And I think that, this is a interesting matchup, obviously welterweight division. We've seen mixed results from Trevin Giles. Trevin Giles is like one of the more up and down UFC fighters that we've seen. I think both of us tried to fade what's his name? Bonfim, right?
Bogdan.
We ended up getting his ass, but we tried to fade Bonfim with Trevin Giles because Trevin is a guy that basically had only been submitted late in fights when he had already been in like back and forth 3-round affairs. It was by Zach Cummings and Gerald Mearshart, two like really savvy, experienced vets when he was still on the come up. But he has had a lot of time to develop. He hasn't really shown me that he's like, gotten much better, right? So I do think that he's a guy that has some baseline skills, but it's almost unfortunate, man. He like quit his day job and all this shit, and I just haven't liked what I've seen from Trevin. So like, I think he could win this fight. I think he's a capable fighter, but like, how many times am I going to let you burn me before I'm like, maybe you're just not as good as I thought, And when I think about Trevin Giles, I think he's got problems in multiple phases, right? Like he's been submitted now pretty easily. I think you could say, hey, that was off the fatigue. Hey, that was off the getting rocked. But also, Roman Dolidze made some mistakes in that fight. He had him in some dire positions, right? He put him in some dangerous spots. Giles has decent process to work out of submissions, but if he's rocked at all, his process goes out the window. He becomes very compromised in his grappling. So I think that against Prates, that could be really dangerous because Prates is a dangerous guy. He's going to swing violently. I think he's a guy that I expected, this is another one where right winner, wrong method. I thought he was going to submit on the Contender Series. He ended up blowing that guy's head off. But I just felt like when other people try and force wrestling and grappling to a ridiculous extent, it opens them up to get grappled on the counter, right? And we did see this with my guy, Victor Hugo, right? Where the other guy's trying to wrestle, trying to grapple, and then he goes, knee bar, hold that, and just finishes him right away. So I do think opportunistic submission hunting is a possibility for Prates here. But he's not as good a submission process as most of the guys that have caught Trevin Giles. So it's got to probably be done on the feet. I think he's got a path there too, where Trevin Giles, we've seen him hurt, rocked a couple of times. I think Trevin could win the fight with his boxing, but if this becomes a kickboxing match defined by the kicks, I just think Prates is way heavier with his shots, and I think he probably takes a better shot than Trevin Giles as well. So give me Prates here to win by submission. How do you feel?
Yeah, there are some dog opportunities on this card, but Officer Giles isn't one of them, man. I think he's part-time in this. He's got like 10 kids I've seen on Instagram, so he's a family man. He's busy at home. He's a little bit chinny. I think the fire's kind of gone. So yeah, I like the new guy, but I'm not laying the chalk on it. I agree. He probably TKOs him at some point, probably round 2 after Giles has tried to take him down and failed. But yeah, Giles, the last time he subbed was like 9 years ago, man. And when I'm looking to fade this Prates guy, obviously you just need to fucking Tapology bet it, man. He's been subbed like fucking 4 or 5 times. Everyone tries to take him down. He's on steroids. Giles is not. He should probably get on him now that fucking Jeff Novinsky's no more. But yeah, I just think all the favors for the Brazilian, man. And Giles is going to get cut most likely. He is only 31, but I was surprised by that. I was expecting him to be like 36. He's been around forever. But like I said, the big thing for me is the fire. I think it's gone for Giles. He's just showing up. And when the going gets tough, so will he, man. So yeah, I like Prates, whatever his name is in this one.
Yeah, me too, my man. The thing is, when I look at Giles, like I just see a guy who is capable of being finished in multiple positions. I don't think he's a lock if it goes to decision either, fighting the close decisions with bad fighters. I just think, there's been a lot of flaws. There's been a lot of problems. He'd have to show me more before I could get there. Let's move to this main card, my brother, where we've got a rebooked fight. If you guys are new here, welcome. But I'm just going to let you know off the top, rebooked fight's not my favorite on paper, just because bookmakers got all the best information and we're stuck with whatever they have left to give us. And in this spot, man, I'm seeing a lot of bullish takes on Rodolfo Vieira. I believe last time this was booked, I was leaning towards the Rodolfo Vieira side. And the reason being we're in Brazil, right? Rodolfo's backyard. I felt like Petrosian was probably going to be, everybody's like, telling him he's going to die. It's going to be uncomfortable. And I just thought he might break under that pressure. We've seen he gives up the back. I've gone through, I have like a Google Doc. I can, send anybody who wants, hit me up. But it's basically like all the times in the UFC where Armen Petrosian's given up his back. It's been a number of times, right? Against many fighters, given up takedowns against many fighters. But I also just think to myself, like, Rodolfo is not a guy that always goes out there shooting takedowns. Like he's a guy that sometimes shoots more takedowns than others. I don't think he fully commits to his takedowns out of fear of gassing. So I think there's sometimes you see him shoot like 50% and then just kind of give it up. I think he's getting more comfortable on the feet, which could be a blessing and a curse, right? Like you start to get comfortable on the feet, you start being more willing to exchange. You get rocked and almost finished by Cody Brundages of the division, right? Which should be like, frankly, a layup win for Adolfo, right? So when you're looking at those kind of things, I say to myself, man, Adolfo doesn't always make it easy, right? I actually think what I had bet maybe last time was Adolfo by KO because I was like, man, it's like 10, 12 to 1, whatever it is. I think Adolfo has got more power than people realize. Like he's just built like a house. He throws out that jab. It starts busting up Chris Curtis's nose and these people because he's built like a house. But he's also not the most violent guy. Like if you talk about like ranking violent intentions on this card, I think Adolfo would be near the bottom, right? Like he didn't want to hurt anybody. That's not his interest. He just wants to get the finish and the fight to be over. That's what he really wants. He's the most uncomfortable fighter, I feel like, on the card. And that's the problem I have with him. It's just like he's starting to get mildly more comfortable at 34 years of age. It's like it might just be a little too late. And I think that on the feet in this matchup, he's got a horse to deal with. Like Armin on the feet doesn't have many finishes and doesn't have many knockouts because he's a kicker. Like he's going out there trying to take people's legs out from under them. He's trying to punch, into kicking combinations. But we've seen on Contender Series, like let's not make a mistake and say this guy can't knock people out. He can knock people dead. For sure. He's done that before the UFC as well. So Adolfo doesn't want to be swinging with this guy like he's Cody Brundage. You understand me? Like he needs to take this guy down to the ground, I feel. I think he could compete for small portions on the feet. But honestly, I think it would be a massive mistake for Adolfo to stay on the feet with this guy for any extended period of time. And I just think that Armin's going to feel no danger on the feet. I think he's going to try and stalk this guy. I think he's going to try and exert some pressure. And I don't think that that's great for Adolfo. So the more time I've had to think about this matchup, the more I lean towards the underdog Petrosian, which also makes me nervous, right? We're in the small octagon. Theoretically, Adolfo should be able to, get some takedowns. Adolfo is one of the best back takers I've ever seen. I have posted before the video of Adolfo, like grabbing from the front, like a chest and back rib, and then just like pulling himself around like he's Spider-Man. He's unbelievable, but he's also a guy that was getting jabbed up and almost finished by, what's that guy's name? Terrible, terrible fighter. I just pulled up his record. Saparbek Safarov, he dominated. But Oscar P. Shota, he literally went to the second round with Oscar P. Shota. I was just like, my word, like it has not been clean and easy in most of the Adolfo fights. So I love stopping Brazilian hate. I love Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Adolfo's my boy. But I'm just saying, man, Superman Petrosian's not an easy mark. Gregory Rodriguez put him in a damn Suluev stretch. He was like, F it, I'm cool. Like he just doesn't find ways to tap out or give up when he's in bad spots most of the time. We've seen it. He's had many opportunities to quit and give up. He just hasn't done it yet. So I do think Adolfo more technical, more like better ability to finish. But what if he gets that sub locked in with 6 seconds left on the clock? He burns his arms out. Round 2 starts. Guys, we know what that looks like. Adolfo's like, he's shaking. He's too nervous. I don't like those things for Adolfo. So if he can show continued improvements, I'm just going to take my hat off to him. Brazilian legend. But I can't feel confident about that fact. Did you have anything you want to add here, Rich?
Yeah, it has got Twitter divided, man. You've either Vieira sub or Petrosian KO 2-3, I feel. And I'm on the Petrosian side as well, man. I heard some cases, people saying it's the small cage now, it's going to favor Vieira. Yeah, maybe not, man. I just think it's going to push for a high pace, and I think Petrosian's got the better cardio, man. I like the numbers for 2-3 for Petrosian too. I think there's some good looks. I think it's 850 and 1100. Yeah, his strength of competition's been shit, and he's struggled, man. Stolfus, Brundage, subbed by fucking Fluffy Hernandez. And that's an important one to note, the Hernandez fight, because Hernandez pushes a high pace just like Petrosian does. Only Petrosian throws more volume, more diverse striking, kicks, body shots, etc. So I'm happy with the Petrosian side, man.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, my man. I just think it's a very binary fight, right? Like if Adolfo wins, I do think he's probably winning it by sub. Or I should say, I think he's probably winning it inside the distance, right? I think it's going to come from a dominant grappling position if he wins. And we will certainly not slander Fluffy on this show. But what I will say is there have been guys that have hurt Fluffy, gotten to him early on in fights, and Adolfo had some great positions in that fight, right? It's not like he struggled to get to good positions, but he was unable to finish, right? And we just saw that being stingy, not being willing to give up when the going first gets tough was enough for Fluffy to survive some really dire spots. And I think sometimes, especially that mounted position, if you're not going to be violent and aggressive, guys, sometimes the mount can be counterintuitively not as effective, right? Like there's not many submissions from the mount. It's not super easy to sub somebody from there. It's more so a dominant position where you can get somebody uncomfortable, force them to give the back, force them to, start framing, isolate an arm. That's how you have to work it. But it's like the mount is a slower position in grappling unless you're going to batter somebody, from the top position. And I just haven't seen enough committed ground and pound from Adolfo Vieira to feel confident that he'll make full advantage of takedowns in this fight. So he might go out there, get a takedown in the first round and just gas himself out, trying to take down, hold, control, positionally be aware. And I worry that, he'll fill up with that lactic acid and come out for round two, looking like he's stuck on an elevator, or stuck with 2 ski poles in his hand like he did against Fluffy Hernandez. So it was not a good look there. Next up, guys, we can move to a fascinating fight on the main card between Michael Johnson and Darius Flowers. Only bullshit going on here seems to be the social media talk, right? Who blocked who on Instagram? All a bunch of crap as far as I'm concerned. But, I mean, let's just call a spade, right? Michael Johnson has been one of the worst investments in UFC history. People bet on him all the time. He doesn't win that many fights. When he does win, it's typically as an underdog. He surprises people. As a favorite, he's dropped the ball just about 1 million times. So I think that in this fight, I think both of these guys have some flaws, right? Like let's be serious. Darius Flowers is a guy that has been finished many times, right? He's been fighting on the regional scene, taking it half serious for a while, but he's had 1 million amateur fights. He's had a bunch of professional fights. And if you look through his record, guys, he has had mostly fights at 185 pounds, 170 pounds, 175 pound catch weight. The guy has been fighting way up in size. And so a lot of people are saying, man, this guy's cardio is terrible. This guy, he's, out of shape and whatever. And, he doesn't know anything. He's got terrible skills. And I'm like, he's training with real professionals, right? Like UFC level guys, Chicago fight team, Bilal Muhammad, putting on with a bunch of really tough fighters. So is he like just not getting better over the course of his career? Is that what I'm expected to believe? No, I think what happened is you're going to underperform if you're at a suboptimal weight class. Jared Cannonier, prime example of like somebody we've seen in the UFC go from being like a mid below average fighter to being a top 5 guy in his division, who almost knocked out Robert Whittaker. That's the facts, right? At heavyweight, he's a bum. At 205, he's below average. At 185, he's a top 5 guy. That's how much weight classes matter, okay? This guy, Darius Flowers, at 185, I watched a fight with a guy who was like a James Krause product, right? James Krause, like Ryan Leninger, I think the guy's name was. 185, big fellow, big kid. He was getting cracked. He was getting rocked, wobbled all over the place. Darius Flowers had this guy on death's door looking like a fat uncle from the barbecue. My man was not trying to fight professionally at that time. Like he was just like, you need somebody? Okay. Like they called him the day before. He was not in shape at all. And he's taking the guy down, punching him in the face, beating him up. I was like, this is unbelievable. This guy's the greatest fighter I've ever seen. Now he did gas out in that fight. He did get finished in that spot, but they were like panicked in the corner in round 2. Like, Ryan, like you're trying to be a serious pro. Like you're like 5-2, 6-2 as a pro, and you're about to lose to fat Darius Flowers, the 155 pounder in his heart, like the guy who could make that weight. So I'm just like, I look at Darius Flowers and I say, I see potential, right? I see a guy who's at 185 throwing hands with people with zero fear and rocking them. So I'm like, this guy can bop. This guy has power. Then he goes out there against Jake Matthews in a debut. And Rich, what's the most common refrain if you have to criticize somebody in a debut, right? I'll think of a Daniel Zellhuber. He did nothing. He just froze. Like that's the most common problem is I'm out there like, what did I do? And it's hard, right? You're in a UFC fight. You're like, oh, I know this guy. Like I've watched him on TV. Like hard to do. This guy, Darius Flowers, goes out there against Jake Matthews, who's had like 20 UFC fights. I'm kidding, but like go do the math. It's a lot of them. He's been around a long time. I think he has an 8-3, 9-3 record at welterweight or whatever. Very good. This guy, Darius Flowers, gave him no respect, walked him down, and tried to knock him out for about 4 minutes, took him down, passed his guard. I was like, I forgot that this fight happened. Like, I truly couldn't believe what I was watching when I rewatched the tape. And I'm like, how is this guy an underdog to Michael Johnson? So, listen, Michael Johnson, here's the truth. Way better wins, way better skills. Timing is everything in mixed martial arts. I think Michael Johnson has a bad chin. I don't think he's ever had the best chin, but I think he's been in war after war after war in the gym. I think he's been in war after war in the octagon. And what we have seen from Michael Johnson, not on one occasion, several occasions, Rich, I think you could attest to this, is he could fight a perfect fight and lose. He's done it how many times? Michael Johnson is the best at going out there and putting on a performance he could be proud of in a loss. He just goes out there, throws hands, and then makes a categorical error and gets finished. And like, it's happened not one time, not 3 times, every time. Like, it's a pattern. It's a systemic way he loses. Josh Emmett, great fight, knocked out so brutally. Carlos Diego Ferreira. I remember this. I'll tell you guys this because it's a great story, and then I'll pass the mic to Rich. But I remember the last fight for Michael Johnson. I'm sitting there. I'm at a friend's house. My buddy says to me, bro, I'm going to bet on Michael Johnson. Can you please bet Michael Johnson for me? He hands me a $50 bill. And I said to him, brother, I can't do that. I said, I can't do that. I was like, here's what will happen. I'll pay you if I'm wrong. I was like, I cannot let you put $50, hard-earned dollars on Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson is out there pitching a clinic. This guy's looking at me like, oh, yeah, you can't put the money on Michael Johnson. Can't put the money on Michael Johnson. When I tell you, you need to put the money on Mike, you can't put the money on Michael Johnson. And when he's literally the image of Christ. My man is just crucified for the 10th time in his UFC career. I'm not trying to be rude, but just like, it's happened a number of times. Laid out completely flat on his back, both arms outstretched. Diego Ferreira is a great fighter. Guys, he's 38 years of age. He's an age contemporary. This is Jeremiah Wells and Max Griffin, 37, 38. Who knows? 2 old guys figuring it out. Darius Flowers isn't that. He's a younger guy. He's a guy who's on the build. He's now fighting at an optimal weight class of 155. I think he's going to absolutely shadow around Michael Johnson. But the truth is, I think that the way that this fight gets greasy is if they start grappling. Because I think then it gets dicey, right? I think Michael Johnson has better submission skills, has better understanding of grappling than his opponent here. I think he has way less physical strength. I think that he has way less dynamism. And I do think he could get picked up and horsed around by a guy like Darius Flowers, because I've seen that at 185 and 170. So I'm like, Darius could go out there, pick this guy up, slam him, and break something, right? He's an older guy. He could go out there, knock him out with the first punch of the fight. I truly believe that. He could find a way to outlast Michael Johnson, who makes critical errors down the stretch in a lot of his fights. I like Darius Flowers here any way you scratch it. How do you feel, Rich?
Yeah, I figured you liked him. I like him by sub, man. The only thing I disagree with what you just said is the bit about Michael Johnson and, having the better jiu-jitsu or understanding of jiu-jitsu. I think Flowers is prime for the submission, man. When I look at the numbers in this fight, and you got Flowers, I think it was 10-1 for the submission. That's the only value I see. Michael Johnson KO was like plus 120. Can't hit that. I ain't betting in money line. Fuck that. When the fight first got announced, I seen Johnson minus 120, minus 130 against this bum. It seemed too good to be true, so I laid off it, and I'm glad I did, man. It's a fucking trap line. Whether that means I'll go and bet Flowers, I doubt it, but I am interested in that sub line for a quarter of a unit. I think it could be a club and sub. Like you said, he could just literally fucking get Johnson down, and then Johnson can go back to his flaky ways like he did against Guida, Darren Elkins. So, yeah, I like to have a little bit on every fight. So why not? I can put fucking $25 on Flowers by sub, man, and be done with the fight. So that's what I'm going to do.
You know, Rich, I almost don't want to give away this free game, but because we got 109 people rocking with us live, I'm going to give this away. And I haven't bet this yet, so don't fucking mush this, you sons of bitches. I'm kidding. I love you all. But what I'm saying is this. I think that if I was taking that, I would also take a little bit on the ends by sub. Just because you got a guy in Flowers here who's been submitted a million times, right? He's just not very good to the submission. You got a guy, Michael Johnson, who's been submitted a million times, not very good to the submission. And the ends by sub is like fucking insanely priced. So again, just I think in this fight, I like Flowers on the money line. I think that people are kidding themselves if they think Flowers can't win a decision here as well. Like, number one, I've seen it take some money. I'll just say that. But number two, when you look at the Flowers side, like, what does it take to get from 185 to 155? Any of you guys that have ever competed before, I think you guys will know the answer. Discipline. That's what it takes. There's not much else that's going to get you 30 pounds down and look like you still have a somewhat athletic frame. I think Darius Flowers is committed. I think he needed an opportunity to pursue this full time. I think he needed some more chances, right? At 185, at 170, he had this ceiling. It's never going to go anywhere. At 155, if he can continue to produce the same power, the same dynamism, right? That same I don't give a shit attitude. If he has that plus cardio, that's a guy to deal with now in this division. And meanwhile, Michael Johnson is a gatekeeper at best. And like, I like Michael Johnson, nice guy, whatever. That's what I can say about him now. Like, nice guy, can win rounds, not the most dangerous guy, not the most finishes.
Yeah,
Give me Darius Flowers, bigly. In my head, I haven't bet it bigly, but like, just as I see this, I think Darius Flowers passes the torch to himself. I think he's gonna alley-oop back. Thanks for playing. Goodbye.
Yeah, I just had shout out to Glim because he asked about Michael Johnson or wanted a second opinion on Michael Johnson's sub, and I said fuck no. I still feel that way. I don't think Johnson's subbing anyone. And yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you about Flowers, but I don't think he's all that. I just think in this matchup, it is 50-50 because of everything you mentioned. But Flowers against anybody else, man, he isn't good at all. But it's Michael Johnson, so I don't hate your luck, man.
I can't wait for Darius Flowers to go on a 3-fight run, and then we get to fade him at minus 200. It's going to be glorious. But I like Darius. I think he's a fun enough guy, and I just think that overall, he's got more upside in this fight. So people cap fights differently, right? I know a lot of people are going to say the level of competition, the skill. I just think about more than that, and I just think that sometimes the better fighter doesn't win, right? How many times have we seen that? I mean, about a bajillion. So I do think skill for skill. I probably agree with you guys. Michael Johnson, 5 years ago, Michael Johnson probably does smoke him. It's not 5 years ago. It's 2024. And I think Michael Johnson's coming off a career worst loss via knockout. And it's mere speculation whether or not he can take a punch anymore because his chin has been deteriorating over time. So next up, Brad Tavares taking on Gregory Robocop Rodriguez. And Rich, why don't you start us off with this one, brother?
Okay, yeah. Don't bet Brad Tavares. He's not a live dog. He ain't going to win. It's up to you. You're going to take Robocop money line or you're going to take the ITD and hope that Brad, his notorious durability is declining because we know Brad, man, he's got good takedown defense. He's very serviceable in there, but he couldn't get Weidman out of there, man. He even lost round, I think 2 it was against Weidman, the corpse of Weidman, shall I say. So I think Brad is regressing deeply. I'm not a big fan of Robocop. Shout out to Bruno on his debut, who TKO'd him at like plus 450. But yeah, I like Robocop here. Like I said, I don't think Tavares is a live dog, man. I don't know whether it'd be ITD. I don't even know whether I'm going to play it. I don't really like the numbers, and I got other shit I've bet on. So Robocop for me.
Yeah, man, I'm going to agree with you here. Listen, I like Brad Tavares. I think Brad Tavares is a great fighter. And I honestly, the one thing that gives me some pause here is I feel like Brad is saying the right things in interviews this week. He's like, listen, if I don't have the love to be here, I'm out of here. If I don't want to be here, if I don't love training, I'm out of here. But I still love it all. I still want to do it. So that's why I'm doing it. And he's like, I've been around a long time. I've competing with guys like Michael Bisping for the most UFC fights in this division, the most UFC wins in this division and things. He's like, that's what I'm looking at. He's like, trying to compete with those guys, and so like, he seems like he has goals, like things that he's still aspiring to. But my brother, I agree with you. When you look at Gregory Rodriguez, he lost to an age contemporary, right? Bruno, young guy on the come up, scary, he's got real power, like commits to his shots. And then I faded him with Nursultan Ruziboev, who's a monster, who's huge, right? Like, because that's just the way that this game goes at 185. Like, you're going to play games in the pocket. You're going to go out there and swing, going to put on volatile fights. It's going to be, 50-50 propositions, right? And when it's plus 250 or plus 190 on one side in a 50-50 fight, I'm going to take it, right? But when you're looking at this, I don't think it's 50-50 because I don't think of Brad as a huge knockout threat. You know, he hasn't knocked out many people in the division, hasn't knocked out many people recently, especially. And when you look, you know, prime opportunity to win by knockout last time out, didn't cash in on that opportunity. You know, so I think about that and I say, man, you know, this is a spot where RoboCop, I don't love the money line pricing just because he's a guy that has fumbled bags. You know, he can go out there and just put his shit on the line. But I liked something that he had said before the Tulian fight. And I couldn't find an interview that said this like explicitly. I'm sure it's somewhere. I have to go find my evidence. But I can almost distinctly remember him saying something like, my wife told me to stop going out there and standing and banging because he got the scar on his face from the Chitty fight. So then he's like, so I've gone back to my roots. I started training with, what's his name? Former Bellator champion, Lovato. He said he went back and started training with Lovato. He started getting back in the gi. He started training with Gilbert. He started training with all these guys that are like jiu-jitsu legends and just like getting back to his roots of jiu-jitsu. I like this, right? I like this, right? Because when you look at RoboCop, he's very good on the ground. And it's been insane that he never goes to the ground. And when he does go to the ground, he rushes, Rich. He's a guy that like, he does the exact opposite of my kind of jiu-jitsu, right? I'll just say it how it is, right? He's much better at jiu-jitsu than I am. He would whoop my ass. But when I'm saying I like jiu-jitsu, that's like get to a choke because there's no tough guying that. You just go to sleep. Like that's just the way it is. Whereas he does these things like, I'm going to do this like flashy rotating arm bar. And I'm like, why, Gregory? You're on his back. Just take the neck. He's like, I'm gonna hip over the top and like arm bar out. I'm gonna spin out. I'm gonna Suluev stretch Petrosian. I'm like, my dude, just stick to the basics. You finish these guys. And I think that that's what we saw in the Tulian fight, right? Like Tulian sucks. So he just took him down and he beat him up on the ground and he finished him really easily. And I think that that's what he needs to do in most of his fights, right? When you look at this fight against Brad is elite at defending takedowns. Like he's very, very good at defending takedowns. So most guys don't ever get him down. And what I think is going to happen in this fight is he is going to get dropped with a big punch and he is going to get submitted by RoboCop. And the reason I feel that way is because you look at a guy like Brad, he doesn't get submitted because he's got fairly fundamental jiu-jitsu and he never ends up on the ground. Like I have cashed many times on Brad Tavares' money line. I said last time, don't bet Chris Weidman because they didn't give him nice matchmaking, right? They did you no favors, right? You want to give Chris Weidman a free win coming back. You find somebody that can't defend a takedown. The guy's an elite wrestler. He's got elite grappling. Whether or not he could take a punch, that's what you send him out there to do. I felt like they wanted him to retire. I said this. They were like trying to push him into retirement. How do you do that? Give him a guy that's not going to give up the takedown. But Chris couldn't hurt him on the feet. So Brad just had a very comfortable fight. And frankly, it was really like sloppy, bad fight, I felt. Neither guy came away from that looking like aces. I honestly felt like Dana was going to be like, both of you guys go sit down and retire. Thank you for the memories. Get out of here. And now you got RoboCop, who is probably like skill for skill, the best grappler he's ever fought, or like one of them. Like he's fought very good guys in the UFC. I'm not trying to deny that, but like you look at Brad's record, like he doesn't fight many guys that are like jiu-jitsu world champion on their resume. It's like, okay, Gregory's going to be right up there with the best guys he's ever fought in terms of the grappling. And yet Gregory by sub is 10-1. It's like, okay, let's find out. Os to that. Let's find out. I think it's going to be HoboCop in a big way. And I think he's going to be the first man to ever submit. The very tough, legendary Brad Tavares. There's just no tough guy in a choke. I think Brad's going to get hurt. I think he's going to try and stand back up. I think RoboCop back take fundamentals. See ya.
I don't hate it, man. Yeah, I like that look. Big number as well. Bigger guy, 2-inch height advantage.
Normally it's like plus 350, so it burns you every time, and you're just like, oh, I can never bet it again. 10-1. Yeah. I'm like, let's find out.
The only thing is, though, I want to see face-offs first, though. I want to see how they size up, man, and see what this size difference is about first. But yeah, I could be on fair.
That. And the only other thing I would mention is if the ends by sub is like the same price, I would take that just because we've seen how many times things could get finicky if two guys start grappling. And I will just say Brad's not a submission guy at all. But like when you look, all he's been posting about, this was something that stands out to me. I always do these social media stocks, bro. Brad is like only posting his children doing jiu-jitsu. Like I'm like, is this guy actually training or is he just going to his daughter's jiu-jitsu class? I don't know. But it does seem like he's been like going to gi jiu-jitsu classes. So I'm like, if there was ever a time for Brad Tavares to bust out his own submission skill, it would be if RoboCop either gets really, really tired.
You love them ends in ITD, man. Yeah, chat, don't listen to Liam. Do not bet Brad Tavares.
No, I'm not saying to bet Brad. I'm saying if they're the same price, always cover more outs. That's just, it's like my fundamental betting philosophy. Because so many times you see people take like 50 cents more value for a bet that gives them 50% less outs. It's like,
yeah, I know what you're saying.
okay, that's not good, Evie. But next up, man, let's move to this middleweight contest. And you're hearing me right. Middleweight for Ihor Potieria, coming down from 205 pounds. And I saw him posted on IG, like holding his skin flap or whatever, like very strange guy. But he did seem like he's cutting the weight. I think he's going to make this weight class at 185, honestly. Seems like he's losing the weight. So the things that concern me, like the guy's drinking Coca-Colas and like, out there, like eating, drinking, whatever. It seems like he doesn't take his diet super seriously for a professional athlete, which I think my guy Prodigy at Prodigy MMA on Twitter pointed that out. So shout out to Prodigy. And when I'm looking at that, like that's not a great sign for me, especially cutting down to a new weight class. But I think he's going to make it. Like I think he's losing the size. He posted a couple pictures where he looks visibly smaller, and he was kind of fat before. So like, skinny fat. I always talk about it. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. It's just we got to call it like we see it. We're being analysts. These are professional athletes, right? So he had a lot of body fat to lose. He didn't have to like just take all this water out of his body. He just changed his body composition a little bit. I bet he's training more. So you could still eat like shit. You can't out-train a shit diet, but you could definitely lose weight while you're eating some junk if you're training like an MMA fighter. And he's posting pictures with Strickland and those guys. I think he's been training in Vegas for this fight. So home match, right? Like home match for Ihor. But then on the other side, you've got Robert Brysic. And who are you, right? Like, I don't know who this guy is. I watched some of his tape. Still don't know who this guy is, right? Seemed like the guys he was fighting were not very good. Like I was watching him walk guys down that just looked afraid of him. So that doesn't tell me a ton. I don't think Ihor is afraid, like say a bunch of bad things about him. I don't think he's afraid to fight. I just think that sometimes he gets overwhelmed, gets tired, and gets beat up. So I don't think he's like a world beater. I don't think he's a great talent, but last time out against Adolfo, he gave Adolfo a real scare. I thought the UFC really wanted Adolfo to win that fight, and he got put through the ringer, right? He had to go out there and earn that win. And Adolfo's a pretty big guy, like I didn't think that was a blowover fight. I was like, man, he showed some improvement here. He showed some, poise, and a lot of referees I thought would stop that fight as well. So he has a clear like ceiling. The guy does fall off over the course of his fights. But if he continues to lose weight and like get into better shape, like maybe now that 5 minutes is 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 11 minutes, whatever it is, I think he's going to continue to make some small improvements if he's in the organization. But on the other side here, he's probably susceptible to being knocked out. I think Brysic is going to try and just line him up with big shots down the middle. I think they're going to clash in the middle, from early on in this fight. So for me, the defining factor could be who gets on top. I think both these guys are not very good. So like if one of them ends up underneath the other, I think either one of them could end up quitting or making a terrible mistake. I don't think either one of them is very good on the ground, but I do think the guy who's a little bit more aggressive from the top position from everything I've seen is Ihor. So probably lean towards a dogger pass situation for me, Rich. Not a fight I feel very confident on though. How do you feel?
Yeah, I said the same this week, man. Who is this guy? Some 33-year-old Polish being brought in, being put on the main card. His regional tape isn't much to write home about. His record isn't great. What is this? And then somebody pointed out is Joanna Violence is a client. She's a manager now. So obviously she's a darling of fucking Dana White. He's always liked Joanna. So I imagine he's getting this shot because of her and who his manager is. So that answers that question. In short, again, I don't really care about this fight. Ihor, he was unlucky in that Bellato fight to not get the finish. I bet Bellato by sub, man, and I was so close. It could have been either or near the end of the fight. So I'm going back to the well. This Polish guy is somewhat stupid, 20-1 by submission. Yeah, he has no subs, but it could be a club and sub. He could get Ihor down. He's shown he's got a deficiency in the wrestling department. But it would kind of be dependent on Robert pushing the grappling, in my opinion, which he doesn't usually do. But at that number, man, I'm willing to take the shot. Just put a sprinkle on it, and be done with this fight. Kind of similar to what I was saying to the Flowers fight, man. A lot of shit fights that I don't really want any part of, but I'm fucking up at 1 a.m. in the morning. So I'm going to have a little bit on each fight. And this one I'm choosing Robert by sub, man.
I feel you. Shout out to Dixon, says, how wrong can we be? The refuge of the underdog bettor, my brother. I love it. Listen, I think that both of these guys are live to win the fight by sub. I think that's completely mispriced. I'll leave it at that, right? I'm not going to mush any markets, but I think that Rich pointed out an angle. I pointed out an angle as well. I would look into some of the props in this fight. I don't think it's priced correctly. But we can move along to the next fight here where we've got 50K Dan Ige in the 145-pound co-main event of the evening, taking on Andre Touchy Feely. And this is a close matchup on paper, right? Small favorite here, I think minus 175, minus 180 or so off the top of my head for the Dan Ige side here. And meanwhile, you've got Andre Touchy Feely come back at about plus 150. I believe you started off the last one, Rich. So I'll start off on this one, but I think we got Dan Ige in a very primed opportunity here. If I had to point out the ways he could lose this fight, I think he could get head kicked. It's a fight at the end of the day. He's been very durable throughout the course of his career, but the only shots that came close to connecting against Damon Jackson were some head kicks, were some errant shots where he got the guard up, right? 2 hands in front of it, but you could get 2 hands in front of a kick and still get knocked out, right? So I do think Andre Feely, that's his best weapons. He kind of opens up with his head kicks, his combinations at times. But truthfully, I just think that Andre Feely is the way less durable party. When I just look at these two guys, I see one guy, Dan Ige, who has been through the ringer in some tough fights, never gives up. I said it was inhuman how durable he was against Mozart, where Mozart landed some clean shots, big shots. Just wasn't able to get him out of there. And Mozart's not the greatest finisher, but he had great positions. He landed every shot he wanted to. Dan's just tough as an old leather boot. So I think that Dan has big power. I think he's able to connect with big shots. I think he's got a lot of confidence as well. He's a fearless fighter. The shots that were landing against Damon Jackson were because Dan was trying to kill him. He was like, I'm willing to take the shot you're hitting me with because I'm trying to kill you. And then when he landed that final left hook, devastating shot. But Saif Saud had realized already what was happening. He's like, listen, we can't win this fight on the feet. He's like, if you get backed up to the cage, you will get knocked out. He was trying to warn him, and Saif Saud did a great job in the corner. I'll post that later. What really good corner advice sounds like. It's instructions that will save your life, right? And unfortunately, Damon couldn't follow through, and he got killed. So when you look at this, I just say to myself, man, every time out, Feely is typically overvalued as a favorite. Right now, he's in underdog position. I can understand why people would want to get there, but Dan has performed ably as a favorite. It's when he's a dog, people expect him to lose, he loses, right? He just can't really overcome that gap. But most of the time, when Dan Ige is supposed to win, he does the job. He does it accordingly, and he often has been doing it in impressive fashion as well. So give me Dan Ige inside the distance here. I think he's going to get it done, and I think he's going to get the finish. I just think Feely a little bit too blood and guts, a little bit too willing to get into the exchanges. So, bang. How about you? What do you got on this one?
Yeah, I'd say that the KO for Dan Ige is a little bit mush, man. I've heard everyone talking about it. I've not heard anybody say Dan Ige by submission at 11-1.
I have one for you. My guy, MMA line mover. He's been on Ige by sub, and I like the Ige ITD for that same reason because I think it could be either. But good shout.
Yeah, shout out to line mover. But to be fair, bro, he bets sub in every fight. So does it mean that much? I'm just being honest, man. Facts. Yeah, Ige submission 1100. I like it. I sprinkled Flowers and Robert Byshak, whatever his name is, because of the odds. But I actually think Ige gets it done by submission, man. I think it's a little quick cash grab for Feely. Yeah, he stays ready in that, but in these fights, he kind of falls off after round one. He's a fast starter. And like you said, I don't need to repeat it all, Ige, durable, the rest of it, power in his hands. So I reckon ITD and sub is a good way to go, man.
Fair play. So with that being said, we'll move along to the main event. And Rich, why don't you do us the honors? How do you feel about this main event of the evening?
Yeah, fucking everyone's gonna win by sub, bro. Everyone's winning by sub. I'm a Joe Pyfer fan. You know, Dana White's boyfriend, buying him a house and the rest of it. Jack's digressing 35, coming back from injuries. Happy to point fight now. I just don't think he's dangerous, Jack. You know, he's sub or bust in this one, and it's opportunistic subs, man. It's going to be a guillotine if Pyfer goes for a lazy double leg or something. But outside of that, over 5 rounds in the small cage, Pyfer's too big for him, and he's just going to fuck him up. So I'm not on Jack in any way. I see couple of people taking the shot. I wouldn't advise it, man. I think everything's in Pyfer's in Pyfer's favorite. It's on the ESPN card to highlight Pyfer. I imagine after this one, he gets put on a pay-per-view. So yeah, I'm all over Pyfer, man. I like the submission. The KO line's like +1, whatever. So there's no value there. And yeah, Joe Pyfer, man. Shout out to that submission over Alisson. I know everyone in the community pretty much had it, but that was a nice cash, man.
Absolutely.
What are you saying, bro?
No, that was a great spot. That you know, nothing since Molly McCann, right, has been such a great community cash. And when I'm looking at this spot, man, I just am not sold on where Jack is at right now. You know, I think he might be an overranked middleweight. You know, and when I look at his game, I think that he's done a great job historically, right, Rich? If you look, he's submitted black belts, so he's done a great job in that regard. David Branch, you know, local guy, very good grappler, submitted him in the first round. Gerald Mearshart submitted him in the first round. Like, he's a guy that can go out there and dominate in the grappling. Is he going to do that to this guy? I don't think so, right? And when you look at Joe Pyfer, what makes him a dominant fighter? What makes him a dangerous fighter, let's say? I think it's the fact that he's a physical hoss. You know, he's a guy that's going to be very difficult for most of these guys to deal with in terms of his strength. And when you look at how Jack has normally, you know, won and lost, sometimes you got to look at the archetype, right? Like the archetype of the wins and losses. And I think if Jack feels he can bully you, if he thinks he can outlast you, if he thinks he can, you know, outwork you, then he feels a lot more confident. But if he thinks that you could hurt him, he freezes up and he does not fight like himself. And I think we've seen it on a number of occasions, right? Why did Thiago Santos finish him in the first round? He did not fight like himself, right? Thiago Santos not good on the ground, right? Jack would probably own him if it went to the ground. Glover Teixeira took a life-changing beating from Thiago Santos and then submitted him, you know, 15 minutes later. You know, it's like you look at how Thiago Santos operated on the ground, that was not his strong suit. But when you look at Jack, he didn't bring out the best of himself that night. Then you look at, okay, it's one-time thing, pass it off, no problem. You look at another guy, Cesar Ferreira. Cesar Ferreira, good jiu-jitsu guy, no slacking, right? Is he the strongest guy? No. Was he the best UFC fighter? No. Did he have the greatest results? No. Did he submit many other guys in the UFC? I think a handful. He dominated him, just absolutely owned him everywhere. So it's like, beat him in the wrestling and whatever. I'm like, that's not a great look. Okay. Then against, you know, Khamzat's at 170, right? Everybody at the time was, right? And I think Khamzat at 170, game changer. But when you look at how he's been performing lately, it's like, you know, having more struggles, right? I think he's still a great fighter, but it's not like he's going out there and dominating Kamaru Usman the same way he's dominating Jack Hermansson in the wrestling, right? So it's like, I do think Jack is a guy that has some real skills, but he's a Greco-Roman wrestler, and Greco-Roman wrestling translates best upper body, right? Being able to tie up, being able to throw people around. Are you going to throw around Joe Pyfer easily? That seems impractical to me. He's a top-heavy guy. He seems like a guy who's very difficult to move around. And I just think that Jack is going to be intimidated if he gets close. I don't think he's going to want to be in the pocket with Joe Pyfer. I don't think he's going to want to exchange those shots or find out. So I think a lot of this fight in the early going is going to be Joe trying to track down Jack and Jack trying to run away, skirt the octagon, kick the legs. And I honestly think it's going to lead to a Joe Pyfer level change, because when you look at how Jack fights, you know, he likes to be on top. He likes to be a hammer. But frankly, he's been audited sometimes when he gets put on bottom. And Edmund Shabazian had the only sub attempt of the fight. The guy hasn't attempted a submission since he submitted Kelvin Gastelum, who, by the way, can't grapple very well, back, you know, years ago. Like, he hasn't even attempted one since then. So I'm like, is the guy just like regressing on the ground? Is he not having the same level of success? And frankly, you know, he's had 16 UFC fights. He's never knocked one person down. That's embarrassing. Like, that's a problem, right? In the middleweight division, that's a problem. If you're at flyweight, all right. At middleweight, you're throwing punches, you're throwing strikes for 25 minutes with guys. You're never knocking anybody down, never landed a punch that somebody remembered. It's like, I think that Jack is a guy that, has good low kicks, has a good process for winning minutes. That's sort of where I'd cap it out. I think he's got a good jiu-jitsu game. Sita Katakatami, I like to study those details. Nicely done. But outside of that, I don't rate most of what he does. And I do think he is a little bit overrated, broadly speaking. So I know a lot of people expect Pyfer to win this weekend, but I know a lot of sharp people that think it's going to be easy money Jack. Just add Jack, and more Jack. And I'm like, I don't see that. Like I could see passing on the fight. I could see being on Jack small. I could see being on Jack late round props or something like, hey, maybe this guy will gas out. I do think that's the way to get Joe, right? Like the way to get Joe is to extend him, make it a longer fight, make him uncomfortable. Because I think he's a guy that is kill or be killed. I think he'd rather like you eventually finish him than he just goes out there and doesn't try and win the fight. So that's what he sounds like to me. I think that this fight's going to end inside the distance, one way or the other, and I think it's going to be Joe Pyfer. I think he's going to be physically dominant on the ground. I think that Pyfer can submit Jack, and I think that people are going to be surprised by that. But I think the thing that stood out to me in the interviews this week is he said, I haven't shown off half my game. I haven't shown off anything that, I've been working on. And then, the interviewer is basically like, well, you're very critical. It's Laura Sanko, right? Go listen to the interview if you want. But Sanko's asking like, hey, are you critical of your own performances? And he's like, I haven't really shown my best performances. He's like, at least last time out, I got to show off I was well-rounded. I got to show off I have more skills. I have skills on the ground. He got skills on the ground, baby. And I think that working with Brendan Allen, working with Sean Brady, working with Jeremiah Wells, working with this whole contingency, I mean, guys, they're mostly wrestlers and grapplers, like by process. That's what they want to go out there and do in their fights. This guy can already strike on the feet. He can already knock you out. So it's like, what do I need to work on? I need to work on my wrestling. I need to work on my grappling. I need to work on my defense. So if he can show up a better product in those things in this fight, I think it's going to look easy. I think he's going to dominate this guy. Yeah, I think Joe Pyfer is going to win the fight. And I do think he's not the highest volume guy, to answer what Cowboy says here. But I do think he picks his shots well. And I think I'd rather him pick his shots and not gas himself out than throw too much and gas out. So for me, I just think that the physicality gap is too wide. I think he's going to take him down if he wants to. I think he's going to dominate him physically if he wants to. And I foresee a head and arm choke finish once again for Joe Pyfer. And I think he's going to show off that well-rounded game. So there you have it, Rich. Full fight card in the books. I think we did a pretty good job breaking down these fights, giving people a lot of different ways to attack it. But if they want to know specifics about, unit sizing, things that we're betting, what we end up attacking, the final slate, things like that, all the information down in the description box below. Please go ahead and let the people know where they can find you, brother.
Yeah, same as always. Get me on Twitter. If you want my bets, they are $3 a week. Link in the bio on Twitter, man, to join the Patreon. I run a Discord group as well that we do some live betting on fight night.
Fair enough. And guys, that information all linked down below in the description. Thank you to Rich. Thank you to all you guys for being here. Hope you guys had a blast. I will make sure that this video gets timestamped. I will make sure that the first look and Bets and Banter are up on podcast platforms today, so you can look forward to that later. God bless you all. Appreciate you guys for the support. Make sure you drop a like on the video, get subscribed to the channel, and come back next time because we're having all the same fun again. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Good luck on all your bets. Let's keep the ball rolling.